Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar this evening. I just want to do a quick technical sound check. My name's Kate, and I'm running the technology behind the webinar this evening. So I just want to do a sound check and make sure that you can all hear me. You'll see a questions box on your dashboard for the webinar. If you could just type in where it is that you're tuning in from this evening. That way I know that you can all hear me loud and clear. I can see that Rebecca can hear me in Sydney and Dolby and Canberra and Croydon, Wodonga, Merimbula, Tenoni, Kyneton, Hazelbrook. Wow, we have people from all over, and it sounds like the sound is good. So it's wonderful to have you all here with us this evening. We do really have people from all over Australia and even someone from London. So welcome from wherever you are around the world. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping bits before I hand over to Petrea and Coralie. So if you could please, I'm sure the slide's going to flip over in a minute so we can go through the housekeeping. Fabulous. So if you could please shut down all of your other browsers, documents or programs on your computer, it will make the quality of the webinar better. Please ensure that your speakers are turned up and the volume is up high. You can type questions as we go in the box, as you've just done. If you could please keep them short and relevant to what's being spoken about. We don't always get to answer all of the questions, but we do give them to our facilitators who write blogs as a response, so that if we don't get to your question, we do endeavour to answer them after the webinar. We will also be recording this evening's webinar, and it will be available online in the next few days. If you do have any trouble with your audio, all sorts of things could be getting in the way. It could be your internet speed, it could be just the internet gods. But you can switch to the telephone, which will provide you with a local call number, and that will provide you with a better audio quality. So I know that you'll have a wonderful evening this evening with Petrea and Coralie, and I'd like to hand over to them now. So have a lovely evening.
Good evening, everybody. This is Petrea, and I'm really delighted to be with you this evening. And we have Coralie with us as well. Hello, Coralie.
Hi there, Petrea. Hi, everybody.
It's really fantastic. I'm so looking forward to tonight. And I just want to give our listeners a bit of a background as to how tonight came about. Last year, I was at a medical conference, and I heard Coralie speak at it. And it was just so interesting and so in alignment with how we work at Quest that I thought I would love to do some further work with her. So that's why we've planned the Taking Control of Chronic Pain residential program, which is coming up in a few weeks' time, a bit later in April. And it's also a subject that's very close to my own heart, having lived with chronic pain myself since I was really a teenager. It's been a lifelong companion, and it's been a very interesting journey because there's a great deal you learn from the experience of living with chronic pain. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this evening, but also learning a good deal from you, Coralie. And I thought maybe you could start off just by giving us a little bit of background about your professional interest in chronic pain.
Oh, well, Petrea, you are an expert on chronic pain because you've lived with it. And I think that's been my interest for the last 15 years, is having been involved with people in pain through my rehabilitation career as a rehabilitation professional, and realising that half of my world, or three quarters of my world, of colleagues and funding organisations really didn't believe that once the x-rays said that your bone was healed, that there was the possibility that people could experience chronic pain. It was almost like the elephant in the room. So I became very interested in the idea that there was this disbelief of something that I could see just working with people and getting to know them and getting to understand that they had these very real experiences which the world didn't believe, I guess I got hooked. How does this work? Why is it
Yes.
that the world doesn't believe it, and why is it that X-rays don't necessarily see it?
Yes.
So
Yes.
the
And
longer that went on, the more an advocate I became, Petrea, and that led, of course, to the development of the Foundation of Chronic Pain Australia.
And so why don't we kick it off and talk about why do people experience chronic pain?
Well, there's a number of different answers to that, but it's probably important to understand that there's a difference between the sort of pain that we've grown up with, which is short-term pain. We fall out of a tree, we break a leg, we're in plaster, the pain goes away, we get better.
That's right.
acute, that's normal pain. But after a while, if the pain hasn't gone away and the doctors are saying, I've done everything for you, there's nothing wrong with you, then we have to understand that the rules have changed. Then we need to understand that there's a huge body of research that is exponentially increasing, that is about how multiple body systems get involved to create an experience of chronic pain. And I'm talking about the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, the gastric system. And I think anybody that's lived with chronic pain will say that it affects them on a number of different levels, including their hormones, including their guts, including, you know, unpredictable experiences at different times of the day. So we have to start to understand that research is now really indicating that chronic pain is totally different to short-term pain. The rules have changed, and the more we know about it, the more we are in a position to actually control it.
You know, it's really interesting what you're saying, because I think oftentimes when people have chronic pain, they only align that with the injury or with whatever they perceive as being wrong with them. And all of those other systems that are involved that you mentioned, the gut and the hormonal system and so on, I imagine people go along to the doctor with a gut problem or a hormonal problem, and no one's really addressing the underlying cause, which is the chronic pain.
That's exactly right. And it's so complex, because you can go along and say to the doctor, you know, it's really strange, but I'm noticing that, I mean, I'll give you a really classic kind of example. Somebody goes to the doctor and says, I'm not well, I'm sore all over, and I'm putting on weight around my middle, and I can't understand it because I'm not eating all that much. And the health professional might say, well, you know, you must be eating more than you think you're eating. But in fact, what's happening is that with the experience of chronic pain, we now know that any long-term experience of pain can fracture and dysregulate the hormone system. In other words, we now know that even though they don't seem to be related, the science is clear that diabetes, for example, can be something that's a consequence of long-term pain.
Wow. Isn't that interesting?
I mean, it is very interesting, and it's unfortunate for the person experiencing it, because the reality is that many health professionals are not across what we've learned in the last 10 years, and that's quite, what would you say? It's distressing for the person that's fronting up for help.
Yes, indeed. And is there an educational process afoot at the moment to inform medical practitioners about the complexities of chronic pain and its involvement with many systems in the body?
There is an increased awareness across Australia, probably across the Western world, that as health professionals we haven't done chronic pain particularly well. And we also know that in Australia in particular, because of a lot of the advocacy that's been happening in the last 10 or 15 years, we know that governments are now starting to listen. We do have a national pain strategy in this country, which started at a pain summit in 2010. And that has had many beginnings for many different states. New South Wales has now got a pain strategy, a chronic pain strategy, which is terrific. Western Australia has got a strategy. Queensland's got a strategy, and all of these things are resulting in education programs for GPs and other primary care health professionals. We've yet to see what the result is, but I think, Petrea, it's safe to say that there's a really acute, well, that's the wrong word, isn't it? There's an enhanced sensitivity that chronic pain is a problem and that we can't just dismiss it.
Fantastic. Well, that's very timely, because I know, having lived with chronic pain, which for those that don't know me, I've had more than a dozen major orthopedic surgeries to my legs, and probably have got more in the future. I've often seen it as a personal failing in myself that I haven't been able to manage my pain more effectively. And I think it's a common thing that people kind of self-blame that I should be able to cope with this better than I am. Do you find that's a common theme?
What an interesting comment. It's really tragic, isn't it, that in fact, when you look at the research that has examined the experience of long-term pain, in other words, researchers that have asked the question, what is it like to live with long-term pain? One of the very common themes that comes back is that people do blame themselves, but they also see blame in the eyes of other members in the community. So this idea that there is a magical pain threshold and that I've got a higher pain threshold than you, or that I'm able to manage my pain better than you, is an absolute fallacy.
Yes.
The pain threshold is unfortunately bandied around, and it really is harmful for people because, to be honest, in the thousands of people that I've met in chronic pain and had the privilege to learn from, I would have to say to you, Petrea, that most of them are incredibly strong people who've had to really deal with more than their fair share of pain and all of the things that come with pain, and had to try and put a brave face and a smile at family events where in fact they're hurting and they're finding it hard to even sit straight.
Yes.
So it's actually the reverse. I would say to people in pain that you've had to develop a lot of strength just to fit in to normal social circumstances. So the message is that it's a fallacy.
And so what does that statement mean for you? What does managing your pain actually mean?
Petrea and
Well,
Coralie,
any statement like that is going to have a million and a half meanings, isn't it? But
pause for just a moment. Sorry, the feedback is really terrible and people are unable to hear properly. So we're going to have to pause for just a moment. I'm going to pause the screen, and Coralie and Petrea, you'll both need to dial in by telephone because somewhere there's major interference happening.
Okay.
So I've just re-emailed you both the invitations. If everyone could bear with us for just a moment, and we will just get Petrea and Coralie in on the telephone so that you can hear her better. So I do apologise. It should just take a moment, but I have emailed you both the dial-in details. So for those people who are just arriving, because I can see that people are still coming into the room, we've just got Petrea and Coralie dialing in because we've had some interference on the line. So if you can't hear anything, that's why. So we should have it rectified in just a moment.
Kate, I'm on the phone. It's Coralie here.
I'm here. Yes, and Petrea's here too.
That's fantastic. That is much, much clearer. There's no feedback from either of you. So, Petrea, I'll hand you back the presenter rights and please continue. So, Petrea, if you could just bring the
Terrific.
slideshow back up from the current slide. Thanks, everyone.
So sorry about that, everyone, and I hope that you're back on deck. And can you see my screen now? Just checking.
It'll just take a moment, but it should come through any moment. Have you accepted the presenter invitation?
Yes, I think so. Send it again just in case.
I love technology when it works.
Isn't it great?
Great.
I did make you presenter. So anyway, why don't I keep doing the presenter and I'll keep up with your questions.
Terrific. Oh, there we go. You've made me the presenter. You are no longer the presenter. Okay.
I just I'm making you presenter again, so it might just take a moment, but why don't you continue with the conversation, and as soon as you accept that, it should work perfectly.
Terrific. So, Coralie, we were talking about what it means for people when they talk about managing your pain. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I do. Petrea, can you hear me?
I can hear you really well.
Oh, good. My thought is that it means many things to many people. A lot of people think that when they are told to manage their pain, they're talking about taking medicine, and that's the only way to do it. And the other way is to look for a physiological reason, you know, a broken bone or a torn muscle or a ruptured spleen or some kind of a body reason. And
right.
And my comment would be that yes, you can take medicine to manage your pain, and if you've got a physical disease, if you've got shingles or lupus or chronic arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, if you've got an autoimmune disease, there may well be an underlying tissue problem that you have to manage, and that may be managed by medicines, and it may be managed by other treatments. Having said that, you get to a point with your disease management strategies where you've got to think of other things you do that are much more holistic, that can reduce some of the activity of the multiple body systems that are starting to get involved as a response of you having long-term pain. In other words, it's like a snake eating its tail, that you can have long-term pain because you can have long-term problems because of the pain. And so you start to have to get ahead of the pain and say, how can I reduce some of the physiological processes that are a result of the pain itself, even though I've got lupus, even though I've got cancer, even though I've got chronic arthritis. So what that means is that we have to think of how do we reduce inflammatory processes? How do we reduce processes that happen because we're overdoing things all the time. And here we get into the deeper levels of managing my pain, because for many people, the hardest thing about managing your pain is to accept that we may have to do things differently. We tend to grow up thinking, you know, we identify ourselves as being a superwoman or a superman. You know, we can do, we're incredibly competent, we can multitask, we can, you know, do all of this fantastic stuff. And so that becomes our identity, or at least we think it's our identity. And so that means we can't change. But in fact, for people that have learned how to manage their pain, what they tell you is, in fact, they've had to learn how to change. And it's to accept that their identity might change. That doesn't mean I'm any lesser of a person. It just means I might do things differently. So a good example is people that can't say no. So they continually, even though they're living with pain, even though they're, you know, they know that if they go hell for leather today, they're going to have to pay for it tomorrow. They continue in that cycle of doing too much today and not being able to do anything tomorrow. So part of learning.
Dear, I'm guilty of this myself. You know,
we all are.
I can walk really well on flat surfaces, but walking on grass is, you know, I know that I'm going to have swollen knees for a couple of days and have to use medication to deal with that. And yet, you know, I think that's what you are saying in part two, is that sometimes you choose to perhaps suffer, but that suffering is worthwhile because of being able to attend social events or be part of whatever's going on or whatever. But there is a consequence for many people after they've expended that kind of energy.
And it all depends too what that consequence is. If it means you're gradually getting worse, then you might say, well, I'm going to pace myself a little bit better. Maybe I mean, look, to be totally honest, there are many people that will tell you that they stopped for a period of time, it might have been 3 months, and they did some very deliberate, very disciplined things to help them get a higher baseline. And some people, for some people that really works. That's a technique that's worth exploring. I have met people who can't sit for longer than 10 minutes, but if you explore a couple of techniques that we're going to work on in the seminar, in the workshops that we're going to do in a little while, in April at your place, then there are some things that can be played with where you might be able to increase your baseline level of tolerance to certain activities. But unfortunately, what can happen is you can do too much, then you're off your game and you've got to actually stop for a couple of days. And so you get into a cycle of too much, too little, too much, too little, which means that you tend to stay the same. And look, always knowing that that what works for some people may not work for other people. So we've always got to say, well, we're all individuals, and it's worthwhile trying certain things. Not one size fits all.
And I suppose it's really important to really keep the pain in that whole person context rather than just treat the knee or treat the... I know we had someone with lipedema who was, you know, with this terrible swelling that's so painful. And sometimes all the focus is just on the area that's causing the pain rather than seeing you as a whole person. I know in my situation I've got bad knees, but I've also got a problem in my back. And it's really hard to know, does treating one, is that going to have any positive effect on the other? And I think that ability, nowadays you've got to go to a knee doctor and then you've got to go to the back doctor and then you've got to go to the ankle doctor. And there are very few doctors who actually see you as a whole system, as a person. Do you find that?
Oh, absolutely. What a profound statement, because I think what we did for 100 years was we specialised in medicine, and so we had doctors that became experts on a micro part of the body. And I think that's probably necessary in some ways. But I think as we're moving into a new understanding of how the body works and a new understanding that the mind and the body are just interconnected without any doubt, the science is moving into that direction, that we understand now that the complexity of how we work as a human is contextual. So every part of us is connected to the other part. And in fact, it's bigger than that, Petrea. It's that around us is a context. So people in pain will often say, you know, I've had this really difficult life for a long time, where I've had to look after my mother or my father who's been failing, and I've watched them get sicker and sicker, and it's been terribly distressing. Or I've had a child who I know is not going to live, you know, beyond 20, and I've had to witness that and look after that child, and my life is really difficult. And then when they're taken out of that situation into something that is like a respite or a holiday, their pain goes away. So we know that pain is bigger than just a part of the body. We know that pain is related to other parts of the body. We know that pain is related to the situation that we sit in. So I don't know whether this is familiar to you, Petrea, but you can have dreadful pain, dreadful back, dreadful bits and pieces, but then one day you wake up and it's not hurting. Or, you know, you think, how does that work? So we have to accept that pain is mysterious and pain is bigger than a body part. Now, there are doctors, I mean, we now have something called pain specialists, and pain specialists were, the specialty was created not that long ago in Australia. It was one of the first countries in the world that developed pain as a specialty, and some of the really interesting people that I know in that field are now starting to talk about some of the stuff that you and I are talking about, which is how pain is much more complex and much more profound and mysterious than just looking at a body part and saying, okay, you've got a sore back, let's go digging in your back. And unless you treat the whole person, you are unlikely to be able to treat the pain. And that means helping the person work through whatever, the situation we find ourselves in life, the journey that we're on, the stage that we're on, what is going on that stage, and how do we process it and help, as health professionals, how do we work in partnership with great deep respect for that person to stay with them and hold their hand through whatever it is that their journey is taking them, is taking them on, and that's when you get really outstanding outcomes.
And I noticed too, just in myself recently making appointments with doctors, it's usually a couple of $100 minimum, and then it's a 40-minute appointment, and you wonder how much you can really accomplish in 40 minutes. I think the system probably still has a long way to go before we can effectively treat people with pain, because it does take time, doesn't it, to know people's stories, to see what pain means for them, to understand how they're managing their pain already and how you might be able to enhance that and improve the situation that they're in. I noticed we've had a couple of questions in, one from Nola, I think it was, who lives with chronic fatigue and is bedridden and rarely, can leave the bed. And I imagine that pain would be very much part of that restricted activity. And another one from Barbara about neuropathic pain in the upper thoracic area, and that she says nearly drives her crazy. And her back, she disagrees with the back specialist who keeps saying it's neuropathic, even though she doesn't feel like the full investigations have actually been done. So how do we communicate skillfully with health professionals about the pain that we're in?
What a good question. In my journey with people in pain, which has spanned, probably nearly 20 years, I guess, the thing that I've learned in that time is that it's really important for us to understand as community members that if we're going to expect the doctor to solve the problem, we're probably going to be disappointed. And that there is increasing level of good information that we can start to digest ourselves, and then we have to make some informed decisions about who we choose to be on our team. Now, you can't, many people tend to bounce from doctor to doctor and spend that $200 and feel very dissatisfied that they're not getting what they need. And for those people, I would say, take heart. Go looking, and a good place to start looking would be Chronic Pain Australia, the website. And if you can't get to that website, go to a library and ask the librarian to help you get online. Go and start investigating for yourself and start learning about what it could be and what we know about chronic pain, because there's an increasing amount of information to help ordinary folk in the community start to understand what the science is telling us, And it's not all about a bit in your back or a bit in your elbow. It's that there are multiple body systems, as I said to you earlier. So the more the person knows and the more the person starts to get some confidence that they can choose. Now, how do you choose? The thing about choosing your health professionals is ask yourself a few questions. Does this person listen to me? Is a really good start. Does this person treat me with respect? Does this person, if they don't know it, do they say, look, I'll try and find out? Are they working with you? Do they want to work with you? Or do they say, I don't have the time for you? If they don't have the time, don't go there. It's no use bashing your head against a brick wall. You need a team that's going to listen and respect, because without that, you don't have partnership.
Yes, that's such an important issue, because I know sometimes you can feel like the doctor's already made up their mind about what's wrong with you and what they're going to do about it before you really had the opportunity to explain what's happening. And we had a question also from Rachel saying that she's had several chronic pain conditions for over 10 years. and sometimes it's hard for her to explain exactly what the pain is like when the doctor does ask. I've been in exactly the same situation as this, Rachel, and it's like, no, it's not really my knees, it's my feet, it's my ankles, it's my legs, actually it's in my hips. And you feel like an idiot because you can't even pinpoint exactly where the pain is coming from, particularly when the whole situation gets exacerbated and it's just, you know, a pain experience throughout the whole of your body, really, and it's hard to pinpoint.
And that's legitimate. That's
yes.
legitimate. We know that there are pain conditions that do, and I have met many people and worked with many people who've got whole body pain. That's not the worst thing you can do is start blaming yourself for that. I would really guess my experience tells me that the people that have got those whole body experiences, there is probably a huge story about how that pain began and how difficult life has been ever since that pain began. Because if you haven't been understood or listened to, if your environment hasn't actually validated what's going on and continues to argue with you about the validity or the reality of your pain, then the way the body works is that it'll probably get worse because you're not actually getting an opportunity to partner with somebody to help you manage it. You know, if that's you, then you probably need to rethink your team. You do need to be around people who actually get that this is a real experience and that the science has caught up with that. We know that this occurs. This is not an imaginary experience. You're not imagining it. And the doctors that think you are, they just aren't up to speed. And that's not to say that there aren't some good doctors who are up to speed. They are there. You may have to keep looking.
And one of the other questions that's come in from Narelle is that how do rural patients, you know, people in remote areas who don't have access to highly educated health professionals who perhaps know a good deal about pain management, how do you get that kind of assistance when you live a long way away from such help?
I think it's a terrible.
Well, they come on our. I think they need to come on our program for a start, Coralie.
They do. They do.
And we'll talk more about what's going to happen in the program because I imagine some of our callers have probably been to a program at Quest and know how nurturing and supportive the environment is. And we constantly see a transformation in people, even a physical transformation of just having 5 days of rest and education and good food and someone else looking after you can make all the difference in the world and give you an environment in which you can begin to learn some of these fascinating aspects of pain, because I think when you understand it, it makes it much easier to deal with it. One of the things that I found really, really interesting in your lecture at that conference in Melbourne was how pain is actually experienced in the brain and some of the brain chemistry around pain. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. A lot of the more interesting recent research in the last 10 years has looked at how does the brain process pain. Now, for about 100 years, or actually multiple hundreds of years, back in 1600s, there was the belief that there was a pain centre in the brain. And in the last 100 years, that's been disproven. We know now that pain is experienced, or pain is processed throughout the brain. And what that means is that it becomes, if you think about the numbers of cells in the brain, nerve cells, there are trillions of cells in the brain, and all of these cells have 5,000 opportunities to connect with other cells. So if you do the maths, you come to this vast number of opportunities for there to be brain networks of cells in the nervous system. Now, what this means is that when you have a long-term experience of pain, this network sets up in the brain. It's like a forest pathway, and it becomes so well used, if you like, this particular network for pain, that even just stimulating a part of the network can give you this overwhelming experience of pain. Now, one of the things that pain management seeks to do is to dismantle that network with very creative techniques that are only just becoming understood, and we're certainly going to talk a lot about that in our workshop together, Petrea. But the other thing we need to understand is that there are the pain. So when you hurt your knee, that you get a network of nerves that connect up to your brain, and then your brain says, okay, you've hurt your knee, you've damaged tissue, have an experience of pain, because that will stop you using your knee. That's all short term. In the long term, what happens is the brain gets less effective. Just let me go back. In the short term, I bumped my knee, but I've actually got to see 5 clients this afternoon, or I might have 5 children at home that I've got to manage, or whatever I have to do today. And so my brain says, you bumped your knee, you've done it before, it's not a problem. And the brain sends chemicals down through the spine, which actually damp down the pain. Now, that's our natural pain management technique. So if it doesn't matter that I've bumped my knee, I will actually quell the pain with chemicals. Now, what we know is that in chronic pain, our ability to send those chemicals down throughout our body to quell the pain reduces. Now, for some of the people that have asked questions tonight, like was it Nola who said that she was bedridden with chronic fatigue and no doubt chronic pain. Now, how much fun is that, Nola? It's probably not much fun. It must be
fun at all.
It must be awful. So what happens is, if we as human beings, and we're animals like the rest of the animal kingdom, we require certain playfulness, we require all sorts of things to keep our chemistry in balance. So being sick like that for a long time really changes our chemistry. And so what happens is we start to, even though we have to be we're isolated because of pain, it's, as I said before, it's like a snake eating its tail. It then affects our chemistry, and that means that we're not able to damp down the pain. None of this is conscious. None of it is conscious. It's all something that just happens. So part of the pain management miracle, if you like, or mystery, is that there are ways of learning how to reverse those chemical processes, and that's part of the journey on learning how to manage it. And part of that is actually connecting with other people and feeling that you're loved and feeling that you can smile and you can enjoy, because that changes your brain chemistry too. And those same chemicals that are about happiness, pleasure, connection, love, all of those sorts of chemicals actually have a profound effect on pain. So
it's all your serotonin and dopamine and endorphins and all of those, And
really
I noticed too, we had a second one from Nola who has lipidemia, and she was saying oftentimes when she goes to the doctor, they focus on her weight rather than on the lipedema. And of course, weight is not actually the issue. The issue is not, because lipedema occurs in thin people, people who are obese, and everyone in between. And so I wonder how people in that situation where doctors are just focusing on one aspect that may have some relevance and impact on the pain, but doesn't really address the pain. I suppose we're in this time where all of this new information about the brain and how it deals with pain and the relationship between the brain and parts of the body that are experiencing pain, all of this is so very recent, really, isn't it, that many doctors are not abreast of all of the knowledge about it, let alone the techniques that can actually assist people in dealing with it more effectively.
No, and this is where, I mean, I've said this a couple of times, choosing your team is really important. For the people in rural areas, I think it's much more difficult. But at the same time, if there, this is just an observation that I've made over the years, that the doctors that I have worked with that seem to have been more prepared to look at the whole person would be those that have gone on to do some further education in something called integrative medicine, which is much more likely to look at the whole person. So that's one little tip. If you can ask the doctor or do some research before you make that appointment.
Yes, people can go to the AIMA website, which is AIMA, standing for Australasian Integrative Medical Association.net.au, and there you can find a doctor who is in, hopefully, your geographical area, who has an understanding of integrative medicine, and you may very well have a better experience with someone like that than with many GPs who may be less educated And of course, I imagine for a lot of our rural and remote people who live with chronic pain, I imagine being online and being connected either to support groups that deal with chronic pain, which means they can be anywhere in the world, which can be tremendously helpful to feel that you have a community of people that you can be real with. We had another email from, who was it? Someone, I think it was Shannon, saying people can't see your pain and they often forget that you're in constant pain. And she gets so tired of being fake happy all the time when she just wants to scream at everyone and tell them how miserable she is and to leave her alone. And I think those are some of the areas that we're really going to be focusing on in the workshop together, because it's not about, we're going to get rid of your pain in 5 days, but you will leave with a whole host of very practical skills and strategies for managing your situation really effectively, and also to have a very deep respect for your own story and for what has happened to you and what you do live with, because as Barbara said, oftentimes you don't get, not Barbara, Shannon, often you don't get any positive feedback from the people in your life how well you're doing, because they haven't a clue that you're in pain all the time anyway.
No, and look, there's this other very old-fashioned... Absolutely. And look, the other thing that I observed about 10 years ago was there was a message coming out of pain clinics which said to carers and family members, don't talk about the pain and don't let your loved one talk about the pain. Well, I think that's a mistake. I've never agreed with that, because in doing that, what are we ignoring something that's that important? I don't understand why. More modern thinking, and I'm a great subscriber to the view that not all pain clinics are the same. The more old-fashioned pain clinics, I think, it's not necessarily a good experience for people. But the more progressive parts of Australia, or clinics in Australia, and I can think of a couple off the top of my head that really look at the whole person and talk about story. Talk about the respect for somebody's story, and they don't try and put a lid on somebody actually communicating their experience. And I think that's that validation and partnering and listening that is really an important part of learning how to deal with it. I mean, we can't just pretend it's not there. It's there. We have to actually listen, learn, process, brainstorm, together. It's a together experience. A trusted health professional, a trusted friend, a trusted family member, a group of trusted people that are able to gather around the person in pain and acknowledge, validate, and then work with that person to experiment with what we know about the brain, what we know about how the body works with pain, and also context. Sometimes there's a story about needing to get out of a particular context.
Yes. Can you say more about that?
Not all situations are right. Pardon?
Yes. I was going to say, can you say more about that? That when the context needs to be changed.
Well, this is about...
Are you saying that you may be in a situation in your life where you feel trapped, and that the stress about that, in fact, Natasha's written in saying she has a bulging disc that causes nerve pain down her leg, and she's been bedridden for 4.5 months, and she knows that when she gets stressed about something, her progress takes several backward steps. And I think a lot of people who are on the call this evening would relate to that it's what's going on in your life, how you're dealing with what's going on in your life. And really, I think this is the nub of our program together, is really addressing, there are lots of things in life you can't change, but you can always change how you're going to deal with those things. And that oftentimes we don't feel we've got choice. And in fact, we don't know that we've got choice until we do. But everybody has a choice, not in necessarily what's happened to them, but certainly in how they're going to respond to what happens to them. And I know that attitude is tremendously important in all of this, and feeling empowered.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I also think, I'll give you an example. I mean, when I started out in my rehabilitation specialty, I was very involved with the compensation world, and that is the workers' compensation, the motor accidents compensation. And people often feel trapped in that. They've had something bad happen, and then the journey of dealing with the various representatives from the funding organisation or the statutory authority or whatever it is so distressing and so disempowering, because it's a highly controlling environment. Now, many times I've had a conversation with people about what they expect out of that situation, and many times what's bound into it is that there's a sense that I didn't cause this accident, I didn't cause the work accident or the motor accident, and therefore I want justice. Now, that seeking justice, it may not actually result in many dollars, but there's a sense I need justice, and that's what I'm pursuing. But in fact, it might take 5 years to get to a conclusion, and in that 5 years, the damage that's been done has been just extraordinary. So,
haven't I seen this? We've seen this so often in workshops when people are no longer able to work because of the pain and because of some accident that they've had. But it's almost like you have to cling to the story then and cling to the accident and maintain the reality of it for the full 5 years so that you can get the compensation, which never compensates for what you've been through anyway.
And the systems are so poorly designed, and they're not going to ever give back what the person has lost. And it's hard when you haven't had that experience of those systems. It's hard to understand that that's how it works. It's not the person that's making the claim. It's actually systems are so poorly designed to compensate. You don't ever get compensation for some losses. So sometimes it's better to say, well, I'm going to actually work out intelligently and in an informed way, where do I get my best return here? Maybe I should just actually leave that alone. And for some people I say, let your lawyer do it. Don't get involved. If you're going to go down this path, you concentrate on you and the stress-free life as much as possible. If you must make a claim, leave it in the hands of the lawyers. And don't get subsumed into the idea that you've got to stay disabled.
Yes,
to
exactly.
In your claim, because that doesn't. You don't win that way. It's not a winning thing. It's actually a losing thing. So, but these are big picture things, because people do lose a lot. You know, you can have a car accident where you're absolutely devastated, and I would never minimise that. But I would say to people that there are a lot of other people in the world who've gone down that path, and they get to the end of it and they go, I wish I had never gone there.
Yes. I think it was it Abraham Lincoln who said, I've only felt complete despair on 2 occasions, one when he won a law case and the other when he lost one. And so it doesn't always mean when you win that you really win. Yes. And I noticed too, Greg has said that many people in the audience may very well benefit from things like remedial massage. And I know over the years I've drawn on many, many different things to deal with pain, including massage, acupuncture. I'm exploring prolotherapy at the moment. There are lots of different approaches that can be enormously helpful, and to work with a really good, even an exercise physiologist or someone who really looks at your posture, how you're using your body, and can give you some gentle ways of dealing more effectively with the body that you have got, can be really useful. And I know even for, I think it was one of the earlier ones with chronic fatigue, even having someone take your limbs through a range of motion, a range of movement, if you're bedridden, can be enormously helpful just for the overall functioning of your body. And that complete inertia in bed where you're too weak to move or you're in too much pain to move, that's when I think things like massage and someone who gently takes your limbs through a range of movements and so on can be really helpful. I remember many years ago I went to visit a woman in a hospice, and she was terribly stiff and curled up in a little ball, and she was in pain, and the nurse came in with this little cup of morphine and handed her the cup, and she drank it. But I said to her, would you like a massage? And she looked at me like, oh, no one's touched me. And I gave her a really thorough, gentle but thorough massage. And she went to sleep, and she slept for hours and hours and hours. And I'm sure it was a combination of the massage and the morphine. But when I saw her the following day, she said she hadn't had a sleep like that in months. And so sometimes it's those simple things as well of human touch, because when you're unwell for a long period of time, and, you know, I had 9 months in bed at one stage in traction when I was a teenager, and the afternoon, back in those days, they used to bring in a big bowl with soapy water, and they'd kind of prop me over on one side because I was in traction. And depending on the nurse, I could get a really fantastic backwash. They used to wash your back at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you were in hospital. And it was heaven. And it was actually the only time that anyone touched me, unless they were, you know, prodding me or giving me needles or doing things to me. So I think that human touch and that human contact, and someone who enters your space rather than expects you to function in the way that they can function, all of those things are so precious when you live with chronic pain.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because in fact the research shows that if you separate people from other people, their inflammatory chemicals in the body increase, and of course that means more pain. So so we call it socio-physiology. So there is a physiology of connection. So babies that are removed from mothers, they get increases in stress hormones, which are the adrenaline hormones. Same with monkeys, all primates. And I think it's really worthwhile understanding that we need each other. And pain, of course, is an isolating experience. For Nola, that's been in bed for a long time, that's an isolating experience. So what you say about connection and touch and gentle touch, because people in pain can be very sensitive. So for people with fibromyalgia, for example, they can say, I'm going to go and have a massage, and they can come away worse off. So you're going to go to somebody with for tactile therapy. Again, make a judgment. Is this person listening to me? If I say, please, you know, more gentle, or you're hurting me, does the person respond, or do they say, oh no, you need it deep and you need it hard? You know. So again, it's a negotiation. Who is listening to me? You know, as a person in pain, and are they hearing what I'm saying? And you know, and we can find those people that will listen and will touch and will be gentle.
Yes. Now, Anthony has written in saying, what is this workshop you keep talking about? So we better, given the time, we better talk a little bit more about the workshop. So why don't I just give some practical details about that for a moment? It's held at the Quest for Life Centre in Bundanoon, which is a beautiful residential retreat centre with twin share ensuite accommodation, and there are some single rooms available as well. It's a very nurturing, supportive environment, and we have a large group room where we usually meet, and there's a variety of seating there so that people can be in comfortable chairs or in upright chairs depending on what works best for them. We also have a couple of beds that we frequently slide into the circle so that people who really need to lie down, they can do so for the entire program so that they don't have to sit in an uncomfortable position. So people will find all of the details about the workshop, which if you look for Taking Control of Chronic Pain on our website, which is questforlife.com.au, and if you just look under the programs that we have, you'll find it there. It's in the 17th to the 21st of April. So it's still a good couple of weeks away. And we only have a limited number of places on the program because I imagine, Coralie, you're like me, our programs at Quest are very much tailored to the people who are present. So rather than us just talking at people, giving them information, it's a very interactive process whereby we really want to hear what your experience of pain is and help you to find your own best solutions so that you leave the workshop feeling, A, that you're far more informed about the latest knowledge about pain and its management, and that you have a whole range of very practical and useful tools to take home that will really make a significant difference in the way you experience chronic pain. And when we feel empowered with chronic pain, of course, my experience of it is that it often reduces because I've taken the fear of being out of control with the pain out of the equation altogether.
I think that you've just really said something important there, that, you know, one of the traditional lines out of medicine has been you've got to learn to live with what you're living with now. But in fact, my experience with hundreds and hundreds of people that I've worked with in pain is that often that the process of learning how to manage it means that it does reduce. Some people have managed it out of existence. So, you know, it's not a hopeless scenario at all.
Well, I hope that some of you will be able to join us on that workshop. It starts on, now is the 17th a Wednesday? I think it is, isn't it? It starts on a Wednesday and it finishes on the Sunday. It's fully residential. All your meals, of course, are prepared. We have fresh juices twice a day. It's a lovely environment. There's a massage therapist who'll be on the program as well, who's had a lot of experience of working with people with all different kinds, neuropathic and all different kinds of pain associated with cancer and so on. He's well trained in working with people in many different kind of medical conditions. And there's a couple of steps between some of the accommodation. There's one wheelchair accessible room. There are a couple of other rooms where there's only one tiny little step into the room. And then our lodges, where most of our accommodation are probably about a 50-metre walk or 20-metre walk from the main building, the main room, to where the accommodation is, just to give you an idea of the physical environment. But you're very welcome to ring Suzanne on 1300 941 488, and she'll be very happy to give you as much information as she can about the workshop and answer any questions that you have. And if you are a New South Wales person and you're financially challenged, we also have some funding through New South Wales Health that we're able to direct towards subsidising people's attendance on this program. And by and large, we do our very, very best not to turn people away on financial grounds. So please feel free to ring Suzanne, have a conversation, let us know what your needs are, and we'll certainly do our very best to be of any service that between Coralie and myself that we might be able to offer you from quite different perspectives in lots of ways. And Coralie is really abreast of all of the latest information and research that's coming out about how to really manage pain effectively. And of course, our workshops at Quest are always designed to help people who are living with really significant challenges to build their resilience and to create an environment in which they can find some healing and certainly some peace. So I really hope that some of you who are suffering, that we've had a chance to chat with this evening about your particular situation, I really hope that some of you will feel confident enough and physically capable enough of making the journey to Quest, and we really look forward to your company. So I'll say good night and thank you so much to everyone, and thank you so much to you, Coralie, for all of the information. And I know we've only scratched